I'm going to take this, what we were talking about this morning, a little deeper. And at one stage, I'll talk a little more about Jesus, particularly this week, what we are doing, what we're celebrating, Holy Week, what's going to happen. Remember this. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Remember that. Remember it particularly when you're thinking about your own brokenness, your own weakness, your vulnerability. Think about it in that context. We often say that God hides God's self in my brokenness. So what is it that I'm afraid of trying? I'm afraid of risking entering a certain space. That there's a fear inside me. And I'm afraid of questioning what's going on in that part of my life. And I try to remember that the fear very often is in here, in my head, not necessarily in the situation that's there. The fear is in my head. And you have all experienced this. There's something that you've been asked to do, and it bothers you. You're worried about it. Can I do it? Suppose I start and this happens. And we think of all the things that can happen, that can go wrong, all the things that will block us. But all those fears are here. And when you actually enter into the situation, you find you didn't experience any of that at all. The fear was here. And so the first and greatest victory is in yourself. And every one of the situations that I mentioned this morning, Moses, Jacob, Mary, Jesus, they all had to overcome the doubts and hesitations within them. Once you deal with those, with the fear within yourself, you'll find that you can manage the journey. The greatest enemy lies within. It's inside us. And when I face that fear and conquer that fear, I'll find that the journey unfolds itself, waiting for me to come along. The cave you fear holds the treasure you seek. It's inside you. There's a lovely verse by Khalil Gibran, and I'm sure many of you would have seen this. It's fear, and it says, before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her, she sees the ocean. It's so vast, she has to enter. This ocean is so vast that she has to enter. There seems nothing more than to disappear forever. So the river feels, if I go into that, I will lose myself. I will lose my identity. I will cease to be. There'll be nothing left of me. I will become part of that river, of that ocean. But having come this far, there is nowhere else the river can go. There is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. There's only one way, that's forward. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear. Because that's where the river will know. It's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. It's the same thing at the time of dying. The same thing. To ask yourself, what happens? What will happen on the other side? It's about becoming the other side. It's that old phrase that we use so often, but whose meaning we lose, of letting go and entering into a new reality. That's why I had that first thing. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Face the fear. Take the risk. You're all at the early stage of religious life. Are you actually entering a religious life? Or are you just dipping your toe in the water, but standing outside? Where are you in this? To enter means to let yourself go fully. When you take vows, you are saying to yourself, I am entering another way of living life, not the normal way of living life. I'm entering another way of living life. And this is what Jesus is saying to us. I'll show you how to live life in a different way. He's saying that to us. That's the invitation to us. I'll show you how to live life differently. Jesus never came to give us a new religion. It's about living our life in a different way. And that's what we are looking at. If you want to really understand this, there's no half measure. You have to go fully into it in order to be able to experience it. If you don't go fully into it, you haven't entered it at all. There is no dipping your toe in the water. It is trusting yourself to that ocean, going in there fully. Then you get a glimpse of what this is about. And the reason we have so few committed religious, committed means not to the work. Anyone can do the work. Committed to the life. Committed to a way of loving. That's what religious life is about. Otherwise, you're like an NGO. And they do wonderful work, but that's not religious life. Religious life is about loving. And that brings me to this week, Holy Week. On Wednesday evening, that's tomorrow, isn't it? Tomorrow evening, in my own community in North India, in Chandigarh, a group of people will arrive in time for Holy Week services. I don't want to scandalize you, but I want to say to you that in my community in Chandigarh, we have our own Holy Week services. Community of brothers with a group of lay people coming together, no priest. We hold what the church does. We hold what the church does and try and live that over the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And Sunday, we'll go for the Easter services in the church. But Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday Vigil, we celebrate. And the whole point of that is to try and enter into the mind of Jesus. What was he going through? And our services go the whole day. We start at 9 in the morning with an input, then reflection. We gather around 11:30, where people come back and share the fruit of their reflection, and then look at the way we want to ritualize what we have reflected on, keeping to the format that the church has. And the group will break up into twos and threes and say, I want to do the adoration of the cross. And then others will say, yes, I also want to be in that. So whichever group does that, they prepare that part of the service. Another group will say, I want to have a look at the passion narrative. And each of these, we're going to do it creatively. So we'll be looking at who's on the cross in our world today. Naming those groups, people that we want to remember at this time. We want to look at where was I on the cross in the last year? How did I deal with that experience? And so on. And as I said, the afternoon is used to prepare, and in the evening we have the service, and it can go on for about 2 hours. 2 hours, because there's a lot of sharing, a lot of telling of our lives. I'm saying this to you because you're going to go into Holy Week now. Unless you make it personal, you'll just be an observer at the service. This is about your life. It's how you have lived this mystery of Jesus' dying and being raised. How you have lived it over the last year. It's an opportunity for you to look at that and to recommit yourself to the journey. So I'm going to start here with the garden. Jesus in the garden. Look at that. The garden, that's where the agony takes place. And when you see that, and you see that it's in a garden, immediately all the biblical associations with garden come into your mind. The garden. The garden is a place for lovers. That's what a garden is, a place for lovers. In the city that I am in, we have a number of gardens. Just next to our community house, there's a butterfly garden. And it's next to a college. And so if you're walking through that, I often take people through the butterfly garden, and we'll see the students, boys and girls there, and they're not watching butterflies. They come there to be by themselves and to be able to sit down and chat with one another and talk about stuff. And the garden is a place for lovers. So when we're told that the agony takes place in the garden, we remember that it's not Jesus, the teacher, who's suffering the agony. It's not Jesus, the king or the high priest. It's Jesus, the lover. This is the Jesus that's in the garden. And the agony that's taking place is an agony of love. Now, may I ask you a question? It's this. What is the agony about? What is he saying to the Father? Take this cup away from me. What is he saying? What cup? Suffering?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice?
Expressing himself. I love you, but.
Okay.
And it's a
You know, if it is your will, let this pass me by. And it's often interpreted as, I don't want to suffer. That's the explanation. And I don't want to suffer. Now, whatever you may want to believe about Jesus, he was intelligent. He was aware. If he didn't want to suffer, all he had to do, even at this hour, was to tell the group with the disciples, come on, we're going back to Galilee. They can't touch us in Galilee. We're Galileans. We're safe over there. It's only in Jerusalem that we're in danger. We're not in danger down in Galilee. So if he didn't want to suffer, rather than tell God, I don't want to do this, go off to Galilee. You're safe over there. So it wasn't that I don't want to suffer. It's something deeper than that. He would have known, he would have seen people being crucified. It was a common punishment. He'd have known what happened. And as he watched people being crucified and the terrible pain that was there, he would also have heard them crying out with fear and terror, cursing God, cursing their enemies, cursing their parents for having given birth to them, because now they're going through such pain. He saw that happening. He also knows that he has tried to live his life loving people. His whole life has been lived loving people. And the fear at this moment is, I know what I'm going to face, but I don't know if I will be able to continue loving, or will I end up like these other people, screaming out in fear, cursing everyone? Will the pain be so much that I cannot continue to love? And my whole life has been spent in love. I want to die loving, but I'm not sure if I can do that. Agony is about continuing to love. This is how I have lived my life. Can I continue to do that to the end? So when we are there in Holy Week, it's about how to love. How to love at times in impossible situations. How can I love this brother in my community or sister in my community? Every time I see the person, I get angry. How can I continue to love? How can I bring that love into my everyday? One of my brothers in Rome on one occasion said to me, "We are sent to this world to learn how to love." And I said, wow, what a beautiful way of putting it. We are sent to this world to learn how to love. That's the whole purpose of life, to learn how to love. But this thing about loving is not something romantic. It's something much deeper. To be faithful, to love beyond daydreams, that's romantic love, requires that we enter a great loneliness. The loneliness of moral integrity, the loneliness of fidelity. And this is what's causing the agony. Can I be faithful to this love? The loneliness of duty, the loneliness of renouncing an overpowering desire, the loneliness of losing life so that we might find it in a higher way. For the religious brother or the religious sister who finds himself or herself in love, having met someone and now I'm in love. And I have all the opportunities now to express that love. I have all the opportunity here. And in that way, I will break my vow if I do that. But the opportunity is here to do it. And I say to myself, no. As much as I want that, I'm stepping away because I have another responsibility. Extremely hard to do. And that's the fidelity. So when the gospel writer tells us Jesus sweat drops of blood, that's not a physical thing that he was going through. It's a way of describing how intense the suffering was, the decision was, I'm going to continue to love. It's heroic, this sort of loving. I am absolutely committed to being this moral person that I set out to be. And we see that, yes, in spite of all the pain and the suffering, he was able to say, Father, forgive them. Now, you and I have seen that time and time again, and we've grown so used to it. We don't realize the depth of that. You don't realize the depth because our gospel writers are very sensitive about what happened to Jesus. They don't describe the pain, the physical pain that Jesus went through. They don't describe it, unlike Mel Gibson's film, which describes the pain. The gospel writers don't do that. And if you've had an opportunity of reading what happens in Roman crucifixion, if you've ever studied that, you begin to realize some of the horror of Roman crucifixion. All that the gospel says is Pilate handed him over to be crucified. That's all. Then we're told the soldiers took him and began to mock him, put a crown on his head, all that. Struck him and said, tell us if you're a prophet. Who struck you? Remember all that? But they don't tell you the other horrors of this. And when you look at Roman crucifixion, and he says, take him. Do what you want. This evening he's to be hanging on that cross. That's all. What you do is your own business. And the first thing they did, they took the man to the barracks and they stripped him and then they raped him. That's what happened. That's the first thing the Romans did. We never hear that. Crucifixion was not just a painful death, it was a shameful death. And you can see that with soldiers today. Rape is used as a weapon of war. Men and women. Men and women. Because when you rape someone, you're saying to the person, you count for nothing. We can do anything we want to you. We'll dehumanize you. Then they take them, flog him, hang him on a cross. And I'm saying to myself, how can anyone, how is it possible for me to keep on loving in the face of so much hate and abuse? Otherwise, you say, he says, forgive them, they don't know. And you say, oh, that's wonderful, Jesus. But you don't realize the depth of what happened to him. And in the face of that, to be able to forgive. In the face of that, to continue to love. This is the extent of what happened on Good Friday and during Holy Week. And when I'm there saying, I'm on this cross now, what are the comparable shameful moments in my life that I've had to face? How did I bear that? If it's about love, I'm beginning now to understand the depth of what my response is to how people treat me. Instead of allowing my fragile ego to respond in kind. Someone says something to me, I say something back. Because my ego won't allow me to accept anything else. And Jesus' whole response to life is, let it go. Go deeper, go deeper. That's the kenotic passage in Philippians. He emptied himself, became like men are, went even further, became like a slave, a slave. no dignity, being abused. And to be able to continue to love in that way. Because, says Jesus, the only thing that can destroy hatred and violence is love. It's the only thing that can destroy hatred and violence. Look what's going on at the moment in Gaza. Israel and Hamas. Look at what's going on. You did this, we do 10 times worse. It's a never-ending cycle of violence. And Jesus says the only way to break that cycle of violence is not to retaliate. It's to respond with love. And that's why he says, love your enemies. It's the only way to change your enemy. It's like someone outside there throws a grenade into this room. And if it explodes, so many of us are going to die and be hurt. But one person throws himself or herself on the grenade, absorbs the shock of it, the blow of it. But the others are saved. Because you won't allow the violence to go through you to another. You just take it all in. Take it in. The Carmelite sister, Edith Stein. No, she went to Auschwitz. She was killed in Auschwitz. And the last recorded words of her when the Nazis came to the convent and took her away and her sister with her, the last recorded words of Edith Stein, she turns to her sister and says, "Come, Rosa, let us go for the sake of our people, the Jews. Let us go for the sake of our people." In other words, we'll absorb all the hatred and violence that the Nazis threw at us, and we will not hate them back. We will absorb all that hatred and let it die with us. That's the crucifixion. You're absorbing all that hatred and you will not allow it to go through you to others. That's why we say Jesus died to save me from my sin. He will not allow hatred and violence to go through him to others. It stops there. These are some of the reasons and some of the things we are celebrating. Like you did this morning, take a few moments talking to the group around you. What are you receiving? What is the Spirit saying to you through this? Have a little conversation at your tables. Thank you, sisters. Thank you. We'll give you a chance later on of sharing it again in your groups. This morning when we started, one of the things that I had said to you was, we grow through chaos. Remember, we grow through that. All of us grow through that. And it is when we face that chaos and face the fear that arises out of that chaos, and when we see it, stare it straight in the face, then we're able to move on. You remember the story of Archbishop Oscar Romero, of El Salvador. And if you recall the story, there was a moment in his life when he was giving his sermons every Sunday, and the whole country was listening to the sermon. Even people outside his diocese, they were listening to the sermon. he realized at one stage that they were going to kill him, that they could not afford to let him continue speaking against the government and against the military. He knew that. And he was overcome with dread, with fear. And in that time of fear, he went off to the tomb of his friend who had been killed, the priest who had been killed, Rotilio Grande. And he prayed at that tomb, at the grave. And he realized what my friend has gone through. He stood for his people. He was a voice for his people. They killed him to silence that voice. And they're going to do the same to me. And he was filled with terrible fear at that moment. And he stayed at that tomb, going through it, facing his fear, thinking of individual people that trusted him, that believed in him, that said to him, "You are our voice. You speak for us. We don't have a voice. You are the voice." And he thought of them. He allowed all those people's memory to pass by, and he knew he could not back down. But as he came to that decision, a calmness came over him. He had faced the fear. He had gone into the cave of fear, faced it, and realized, this is where I belong. And he went back. And the next Sunday, in his speech, in his homily, he addressed the army. And he said to the army, to the military, "Stop killing your people." Straight out. Knowing that now he had crossed a point where he could not return. He deliberately did that. Now I've said it. And knowing the generals and all could not allow him now to live. And we are told when he was at Mass, he saw the man coming and he knew the man had come to kill him. And he continued his Mass, knowing that any moment now that shot would come. And that's what happened. He had faced his fear and he was at peace now. I know what I have to do, even if they kill me. Because of my love for my people, this will happen. And he said that. If my blood pours out, it will be for the people of El Salvador. I will live on in the people of El Salvador. That's exactly what happened. Here is the real test. Now, chances are that we won't face this sort of a test. Chances are that. But I can assure you, you will face different types of tests where you'll be shaken to the core of your being. Should I compromise or should I continue? Should I be the voice or should I keep silent? In other words, can I afford to continue to love? Another Jewish girl, Etty Hillesum, also killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz. In her diary, she writes, "My God, these are such distressing times. Tonight, For the first time, I awakened in darkness. My eyes were stinging. Before me passed images and images of human suffering. But there is one thing that is more and more obvious to me, that you cannot help us. You, God, cannot help us, but we must help you. And in that way, we help ourselves. In the face of this God, of this pain and this suffering, you are watching us and you are crying with us, but you cannot help us. The power to help is within ourselves. She began to realize what the mystics had said. Christ has no hands but yours, no feet but yours. You are the voice through which Christ speaks to the world. You are the heart through which Christ loves our world. This is us. This is us. God invites us to free our brothers and sisters. We are co-creating the future with God. Those of you who were with me in the last week will remember me saying that to you more than once. God invites us to co-create the future with God. A poet from my own country, Rabindranath Tagore, in one of his songs in the collection called the Gitanjali, says, "That night when the storm broke down my doors, I did not know that you entered my room through the ruins. For the lamp was blown out and it became dark. I stretched my arms to the sky, for whom I did not know. I waited in the darkness as if in a dream. That the storm was your banner, I did not know. When the morning came, I saw you there, pervading all the emptiness of my abode." He pictures his life as his house, and a storm comes and batters the house and comes in, breaks open the doors, windows, and shutters, and all are smashed. And he's going out saying, what's going on? Where are you? What's happening to me? And in that darkness and despair, he's crying out to God, not realizing that with the storm, God had entered his room, his house, and God is there, standing there amidst all the ruins of his life. God is in the storm. God is in the chaos. I want to have a look at a moment in the history of Israel when their world turned upside down. It was the time of the exile, when the Jews were invaded by the Babylonian army, and the Babylonian general who became king, Nebuchadnezzar, he came along and laid siege to Jerusalem. Twice he did it. And the first time, he took away the king and the courtiers and took away a lot of the wealth of the country and put his own puppet king in charge. And the Jews stayed as a nation with its own ruler, but paying homage and tax to the Babylonians. And 10 years later, the Jews revolted, and the army came back again. And this time, the army destroyed everything. It came into the city and destroyed everything and took the Jews away as slaves. The only people left were the poorest of the poor. And in the place of the Jews, the Babylonians brought another one of their captive nations and told them, you stay in this land now. So the whole Jewish nation was disbanded. They went off into captivity. And here they are now in captivity. And they say, what happened? God said to us, you will be my people, I will be your God. Now, the nation is gone. God said, I will give you a land in which to live. That land is gone. The king that you have will be my representative. The king is blinded and he's a captive. And worst of all, the temple, which was God's high dwelling place, that temple is totally destroyed. As they were leaving, they saw the temple going up in flames. Every one of the things that God promised us has gone. And when the Babylonians mocked them and said, come on now, sing to Yahweh, they said, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? By the rivers of Babylon. Remember that? We sat and wept. We can't sing. Why? Because Yahweh has no authority in this land. Yahweh has authority in that land. Here, the Babylonian gods have authority. So here's a people who have been destroyed. They can't believe any of God's promises any longer. Their life has been turned upside down. That's what's happened to them. That's what exile does. And in this situation, you say to yourself, it is traumatic to watch the God who has given shape, definition, meaning to life be removed from a people's awareness. There are people now without a God. There are but two alternatives for such a displaced deity. This God must either grow or die. You and I, at this time, are at such a moment. The God that we grew up with is no longer viable. We cannot continue to believe in the God we grew up with. And that is a big problem at the moment in our world. If I were to name what's the problem in the world, it is we need a new understanding of God. That's what we need. Meaning will only be restored if we get a new understanding of God. And I want to show you that this is exactly what happened to the Jews. The God that they had believed in is no longer there. They have to reimagine their God. There's no temple worship. So they can't come together to pray. But what do we do? And in thinking about it, they began to go back to their sacred story and say, let us put together our sacred story. And this is when the Bible began to be written, the Old Testament. It came out of the exile. Up to that moment, it was oral tradition. Now it is being written down, just in case we forget who we are. Put it down. And then they come to the story of Elijah, who had been one of their prophets earlier on. And they began to reflect on the life of Elijah. And they noticed the similarity between Elijah's story and their story. Elijah in his cave. I don't know if you remember the story of Elijah in the cave. Elijah is living at the time of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, and they're worshipping God Baal. And Elijah challenges the priests of Baal. And in that challenge, 400 of the priests are killed. And Jezebel swears vengeance, and Elijah runs away. And Elijah says to Yahweh, everyone has forsaken you except me. And look what's happened to me now. They're trying to kill me. Where are you? And he wants to test and see, is God real, the God I believed in? And so he decides to go back to where it all began, Mount Sinai. That's where it began, on the mountain. And when he's over there, Yahweh says to him, stand outside the cave, I will pass by. And you remember the story there? Fire, Yahweh is not in the fire. Wind, Yahweh is not in the wind. Earthquake, Yahweh is not in the earthquake. You remember that? No. Why these three? Why fire, wind, earthquake? And the answer is, when you go back to the time when the Jews were getting the commandments from God, and the fire, lightning struck the mountain, they fell on the ground saying, Yahweh is here. Now the fire strikes, Yahweh is not here. When a mighty storm at that time, earlier time, hit the mountain, and the trees began to shake, and the people were scared with the storm, they threw themselves on the ground and said, Yahweh is here. Now it happens, Yahweh is not here. And then the mountain shook, earthquake. Again they fell down, Yahweh is here. Now the mountain shakes, Yahweh is not here. In other words, all the familiar ways by which we could recognize God, God is not present in all those familiar ways. That's what happens in exile. The ways in which we were able to encounter God earlier, we cannot encounter God now. That's what's happening. And then you have this sound of sheer silence, this gentle breeze that's there. And as soon as Elijah senses that breeze, he puts his cloak over his head and goes out and stands at the mountain gate, at the cave entrance. and Yahweh passes by. In other words, there is now a new way of experiencing God. So to a people in exile who have lost their temple, the message is, you don't need a temple to worship God. There's no temple, you don't need a temple to worship God. That's the message there. You find another way of bringing God into your midst. And that's how synagogue worship began. When the community gathered around the word and shared the word and their own experience of life, and God was present there. And Jesus says, the time is coming, he says to the Samaritan woman, when we won't worship on the temple or on Mount Gerizim, but in spirit and in truth. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there. That's why when you're praying so often, we say, go into groups, share your truth, listen to your sisters. God is there. It's in that place, in that sharing, that you experience God's presence and God speaking to you. And that's why today when we are praying, we often have periods of silence and periods of sharing. Because it's important to hear God speak to the group through the experiences of the members of the group. Who is the God that is being revealed today? In many parts of the world, people are not going to church. And the reason is they're not receiving or experiencing God in their church. I know young people now, and they're not going. So our task now is to reach the young and gather them in a way that makes sense to them. You give them a new understanding of God, a God who is present in our world. That's where God is. God is present in your life. And I keep saying to you, please pay attention to what's happening in your life. That's where you'll discover God. This world is God's agenda. God is present in our world. Pay attention to what's happening there. I'm coming near the end, so hang in there for a few minutes. One of these poets said, the meaning of life is to let your heart be broken. The meaning of life. The only way your heart will be broken is if you're paying attention to what's happening in your life. Your real life. Then you can allow your heart to be broken. So let your heart be broken. Allow, expect, look forward to your heart being broken. The life that you've so carefully protected and cared for, expose it to life. Let life deal with it. Broken, cracked, rent in two. Your heart breaks, and in the two halves rocking on the table is revealed rich earth. When you look at the two halves, because your heart is broken, you'll see the stuff of life there. And in that stuff of life, new life will begin. When your heart is broken, life comes in. If you're scared of having your heart broken and you protect yourself and you stay aloof from life, your heart will be untouched but useless. Useless. No growth will take place. You have to interact with life because God is in the life. And when you interact with life, it will tear you apart. That's what my religious vows prepare me for. That's why I'm at Mass in the morning. And I'm looking at what's happening at Mass. And I'm not concentrating on the host. I'm concentrating on myself. Because it is my body being given, my blood being poured out. I'm committing myself to that. That's what it means to say, I enter into life. And the life that I'm experiencing, I bring to my Mass. And the brokenness that I'm experiencing, I bring to my Mass. And I'm offering that up. This is my body broken for you. This is my blood poured out for you. And I'm saying that to my community that is at Mass with me. And my communion going up there is emphasizing that. I'm saying, Amen. I'm committing myself to being bread broken, wine poured out for my brothers and sisters. I'm committing myself to that. And I finish this again with brokenness, vulnerability. Because if my life is about love, it deals with vulnerability. Vulnerability is emotional risk. It's uncertainty. It's exposure. It is my most accurate measure of courage when I accept my brokenness. My most accurate measure of courage. To be vulnerable is to let ourselves be seen. You see me as I am, with all my brokenness. In my brokenness, God resides. The real living God is there in my brokenness. Vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, change. So all the things I've been talking to you about today, chaos, change, transformation, brokenness, vulnerability, all comes out here in this mix. This is life. Allowing my heart to be broken is about vulnerability. And I want to leave you with some questions. What would my life look like if I lived by the law of love? This is about everyday life. Live by the law of love. If love was my guiding star, how can I move into such a space? What do I need to do to move into the space of being a loving person? For you as a group here, what do you need to do to let your lives center around love? What would you need to do? What structures would you need to have? Would you need from time to time to have a review to see, are you really growing in love? I start by loving myself in a healthy way. Self-love, caring for myself, taking responsibility for my growth. This is how I wrestle with God. Now, as we did this morning, perhaps you would start off by having a cup of tea, then some quiet time for yourself, and allow the questions that are in you to surface from inside. What are the questions that will be coming up for you? Check those. At this moment in you, as you're thinking about this, what do you think you need? Think about some of this. And then, like this morning, come together again for a period of time and talk to one another about what you feel this day has been surfacing for you. Are you okay? Thank you.